Without further ado, I would like to welcome Miss Neha Singh to join me for this episode. Thank you so much, Neha, for joining me. It's such a pleasure to host you.
Great to be here. Thanks a lot for having us.
Thank you so much, Neha. Really looking forward to this episode. So, Neha, before we begin and dwell into, cracking the B2B code as we're calling it, it'll be very interesting to hear from you as to how you've seen the Indian ecosystem evolve, especially, since you've been at Stanford, you must have observed part of the traditional Silicon Valley as we know it. And given that you started in 2013, it's been, let's say, 6.5 years now. Very interesting to understand how you perceive the Indian startup ecosystem to be, and what do you think lies in store for all aspiring founders that are listening to you?
Right. So I'm actually fairly excited about the pace of activity that has picked up in the Indian startup ecosystem. So I started being a part of it in 2010 when I had joined Sequoia Capital as a VC, and even at uh, that time you felt that the activity was increasing, but now I think it has reached altogether different level. And even if you look at it globally, India is the third largest geography in terms of the dollar invested, in terms of the number of like more than $1 billion valued companies or unicorns. There are a lot of matrices, but even if you look at more underlying, I think a lot more people want to do a startup today. The second thing which has also happened is that the talent pool for your senior management that has evolved, in a very uh, right now there is good depth across all the functions. So earlier, to get someone who has probably run a SaaS startup or different functions within that would have been hard, but today I think thanks to both of them, like the MNCs as well as the startups which have become large, it has created like a really good pool. So I'm actually super excited about India as a startup ecosystem, and I'm sure this activity is going to increase manyfold in the coming years.
Absolutely. That's very refreshing and reassuring to hear for everybody out there, because it goes to show that the opportunity is immense and it'll keep growing as the years come by. Thanks for that, Neha. But going ahead and maybe taking a step back, actually, you talked about Sequoia, and when anybody would come across your profile, it's something that will it's very stellar, because you've gone from IIT Bombay, then there's been BCG, Sequoia, Stanford, and then Traction. So if you can probably talk about the pre-Traction journey, how were things like? What was college like for you? How did things progress? And what got you into entrepreneurship? What was that that aha moment for you that struck you, and you were like, this is what I'm going to do for the better part of my young career. So yeah, if you could probably take a step back and tell us, that'll be very fascinating to hear.
Yeah, sure. So I am going back. Actually, I'm born and brought up in Bombay, and in my immediate family, there was no one doing business. All of us were more engineering focused,
Yeah.
including my dad or my brother, and everyone else were very. I would say engineering focused and job focused.
Right.
So I grew up in a more of an academic environment. In fact, I did my entire schooling in a colony called Bhabha Atomic Research Center, BARC, in Bombay, wherein bulk of the people over there are actually scientists. So it's a
Yeah.
very heavily academically inclined environment to grow up in. So I had not grown up thinking that I will do a startup or I will run a business. I My first job was in BCG, the Boston Consulting Group, and then with Sequoia Capital. Essentially, as growing up, I like technology, I like computer science. So even my undergraduation in IIT Bombay was in computer science,
Right.
and so that had been a constant area of interest. And eventually, I think Traction started more as a problem that you really wanted to solve rather than trying to do a startup. So as you were investing and as you were looking at the private markets, and being an engineering by background, you realize that private market investors, though they are investing in technology, use very less technology themselves to find out about companies or get information about companies. And that is where the aha moment was, that you can actually use technology, which was probably not possible like 10 years back, but right now there's a lot more information about companies which is available digitally, right? So that was the thesis that public markets had been obviously having a lot of information, but private market investors also can use technology to find out companies in much more efficient manner. So that's how Traction got born.
Right, right. But yeah, again, like testifies to the fact that, you have to be problem oriented instead of, just going after a solution which might blindside you to begin with. So great to hear that. And, like moving from there itself. So if we may reflect upon, the 0 to 1 journey for Traction, because they don't call it the Bloomberg for private markets just like that. And I personally am very curious to understand, that how did you conceive the idea? You've spoken a bit about it, but what was the sense of validation that yes, this is something that is a requirement in the market. I see enough growth for it, and we're going to do this. So if you can probably take us through the 0 to 1 journey for Traction, that'd be very fascinating.
Yeah. So actually, the 0 to 1 journey was fairly interesting for us. One of the reasons was that when you were looking at this wallet share or this spend, this actually did not exist earlier. So
Right.
it was not that VCs were there was a platform that existed, and then they were spending anyways of money, and it was more about building a better platform. So it was actually a completely new budget, and so it was very interesting to actually develop the product wherein there is no peer. It's not that you're replacing anyone. It's not that you can make a pitch that this is better than the other one because of some reason. So in fact, in the first 1.5 years, it was a lot about developing what is the product. Is it so we actually the way we actually did that is when I was in Stanford, we got sort of incubated in this program which Lightspeed has, which is called Lightspeed Summer Partner Summer Program. And then they select a set of companies from universities, and they get an opportunity to work with the team members very closely. So
Right.
that was actually pretty interesting, and we piloted multiple versions of the product. So one which is very data oriented, low on curation, the other one which is more curated for this. And then we actually showed the output to various the relevant sort of customers. And I think that was pretty interesting, doing the initial product development, doing the initial sales yourself, meeting a lot of people who are your potential customers, VCs, PEs, corp devs, live, and discussing about them, what are the key things. I think that was pretty interesting, wherein you had to do the initial product development data, as well as the initial sales, which is probably how the initial 1.5 years would be.
Right, right. Very interesting to hear. And, I want to take like a moment and understand better that, so when we compare this to public markets, like I understand that public markets have more data availability, more quantity, and, let's say like a lot of things that are more in nature in comparison to private markets, which is more concentrated, right? So how did you look at the market opportunity then? And what was the sense of, validation that all right, this is also a need in the market? Just want to understand that better, if you may.
Yeah. So in terms of the way we saw the market initially, firstly, it was born out of our own problems that you wanted to solve.
Right.
You as private market investors to figure out. So to give you a simple example, I'd written code for myself to find out companies which are coming up in a particular interesting themes. At that time, e-commerce was really hot. So any company which is bidding up on a few keywords, you can actually just search for those. Or another thing is that if you're looking at one particular company, who else exists in that market? That was not trivial, because you're looking at companies which are competing globally, right? So there were few tools that I'd actually written it for myself, which I found like super effective. And so the first was, this is an interesting problem, and you can use technology to find it. I think that was the first one. The second thing is, as you were investors, you would also think about how is this market and how big is this opportunity. So the second one uh, was more anecdotal, that if you look at it, so there were two things which was happening, which was pretty much in favoring the market growth at that time. So one is private market as such was becoming large,
Right.
right? So right now, if you look at it, the number of large size private companies have increased a lot. right? You have just indications, number of unicorns is probably more than 600
Right.
globally, which used to be a very small number earlier.
Right.
If you look at a typical allocation of an LP to this market, if you have about 50% in the public market, you will have at least 2 to 5% in the private market. So if you have, so one was that, which is this market was growing at a good pace, right? And the second thing what was happening is that this problem could be solved. So just like Google helps you search for companies like a CRM company or a app testing company,
Right.
because of a lot of digital footprints which companies have today. That was the second thing that this can be solved. So I think these were the two sort of headwind that you saw uh, of the market, which helped you take that leap of faith that this is going to be a very large market. And it has actually, like if you look at it 7 years down, we are now in the seventh year. A lot of the budget that we have today didn't used to exist earlier. So a lot of the customers that we have signed up have started using a data platform for the first time in the last few years.
Right.
And earlier when we were starting, people used to, we had to convince people that you have to buy a solution. Right now that's totally not the case. Right now they have already made a decision that they need to buy something. Now they are now it's more about, okay, how does this fit into your workflow?
Right, right. Got it. So something that was, evolving in nature and something that was growing,
Right.
plus a solution that was actually needed in the market. So great, great, great anecdote for us to, also take examples as to how we can brainstorm about ideas when we're solving for problems as well. So thank you for that, Neha. Moving to and addressing the elephant in the room in terms of B2B. So you're a first guest on the show that, talks about that comes from, let's say, a B2B primary background. So if you can break things down into the simplest of layman terms, and if you can just start by telling our audience as to what B2B essentially contains, and at the very minuscule level, how do you service B2B clients to begin with that traction?
Sure. So B2B essentially, as the name indicates, is you're selling to enterprises. And India had primarily been more consumer focused. But if you look at US, majority of the IPOs happen in the enterprise space.
Right.
And a lot of the investors also look at the enterprise space very closely. So India used to be more consumer. Right now, it has had, thanks to a lot of large companies which have come about, now this has become a very large investment focus area as well. So B2B, as the name indicates, is essentially selling it to enterprises. I think the way people look at this market is a few ways. One is, are you, which segment, which size of the customer are you selling to? So are you selling it to SMEs? Or are you selling it to large enterprises, which essentially indicates, your price point is different. That's one. The second thing is it one solution? Is it like one use case that you're solving very well, or are you building it for an industry? So one example would be, it's a horizontal solution. For instance, it's a CRM. So CRM is as it is one solution which can be used across multiple industries. The other is a vertical SaaS. So for instance, a hospital management system, wherein you have this customer and you end up solving more of the problems. So these are probably two cuts. One is the by size, and the other one is the either one use case, or you're solving for the whole horizontal SaaS or vertical SaaS, right? So that's broadly what a lot of people, how investors would probably look at that.
Got it. Got it. Yeah. So Simon, from there itself, so given that your product type is something that services Fortune 500 companies, venture portfolios, and funds which are of the highest stature, you have some great names on board already. So if you can probably talk a bit about how you look at client acquisition, how traction goes about servicing their clients, and how difficult is it to service, let's say, a segment of the market that is considered to be high end, and what is the difference like, and how do you go about it in its entirety?
Perfect. Yeah. So in terms of our customer segments, we work with two segments. One is your private market investors, and the other one is your corporates. Within corporates, there are titles, mainly two titles that we work with. One
Hmm.
is your corp dev team, M&A team, as well as the innovation teams who are looking at innovation in the different industries. And we see ourselves more as a data plus vertical SaaS company. So we have data for this private market, as well as the workflow software that we have is essentially for this relevant set of companies, right? So now coming to the questions, one is how do we acquire customers? So for us, thanks to the fact that I think we are also a data company, we can actually do a lot of content marketing. So interesting fact is that we actually spend zero on paid marketing, and all our main acquisition channel is inbound, and that we get it through content marketing. And it's easier for us to, I think, do that because we produce a lot of content, so we don't need to write additional, or like have another team who's just writing blogs, because a lot of them are actually views from the data that exists. So that has been so things like, if you're looking at innovative companies in or fintech companies in Nordics, or any sort of companies, you essentially can actually do interesting content marketing to do that. So that's one on how do we acquire customers. And the second thing is that how do we serve customers? So ours is a standard subscription platform. It's sort of, the base is same for everyone. You can do personalization based on your preferred geography, stage, sector of investment. And so for us it is fairly so we have a team that actually does that, but it's fairly sort of it's fairly intuitive to actually just log onto the platform and start using that.
Right, right.
And for that we have a so actually, stepping one step back, when we were starting, we actually had a team so I had spent the initial 4 years when the company was founded in US, because that is our biggest market.
Right.
That was our biggest market, and that continues to be our biggest market. So it used to be meeting people and doing the initial sales. Right now, a lot of our sales is through inside sales model, which is essentially, you have a team which is working across different time zones that focus on North America, EMEA, and APAC. So that has been our sort of acquisition strategy overall. And the third thing is, how do we cater to I can just can you repeat the last part? I think, how do we cater to
Yeah, how do you service these clients in the first place? Because I'm sure like there
Right.
are different kinds of demands and stuff like that, and just being able to renew
Right.
them year after year. What is it like?
Right, got it. So actually, there are two ways to essentially, do that. One is you solve it using a platformized approach. The other thing that you can do is add a little bit more services components.
Right.
The approach that we have taken is more on the first one, which is solve it more in a platformized fashion. So if anyone is looking at all the questions, so we actually have a feature wherein people can send any queries that they have, when they're looking at a particular set of data, through we call it an analyst on chat and analyst support, wherein if they have any queries, they can actually shoot that across, and through that we get like a stream of things which people are not able to instantly find it or instantly serve on the platform. And we keep building features, we keep building ways to serve it in a more platformized manner. It's like, people ask, okay, what's hot within a particular space?
Right.
So one is, you can actually do it in a more subjective manner. The approach that we have taken is, can we actually build algorithms or build views which can make this analysis be available instant on the platform. So I think most of it is we try to solve, though the customer segment is actually pretty large and pretty varied, we try to go to the basics and then see if we can solve it in a more productized manner, because I think that has been also very super helpful as we scaled across geographies and across customer segments.
Got it, got it. But stemming from that itself, this sounds very curious, and I want to like probably take a deep dive into how you roll out the product features, because things like the Sunicon Club and other product features look very interesting. But before we dwell into that, I want to take a step back and understand that when you're servicing clients like let's say a Google or an A16Z, how do you like go about the initial sales, and how fragmented is the customer size? Because on one hand you have like a Fortune 500 who has, you know, revenue in billions. On the other hand, you have like a fund which has AUM in billions. So what is the difference in approach, and how do you on a very fundamental level go about, you know, approaching the sales and acquisition for these clients? If you can probably like, you know, tell us, that'll be great to hear.
Yeah. So, interestingly, the way that we have built is one is splitting it by geography, because it has a direct implication on the time zones and the customer interactions that
Right.
you've done. The second thing is, splitting by customer use cases. So, though there are a lot more nuanced customer segments. So, for instance, we work with universities like Stanford universities, governments, etc. But essentially, if you look at it, bulk of our customers fall into either private market investors, VCPE, or the second one is your large corporates. So essentially, and we have sort of a playbook of what is the use cases of these different set of customers, and then the teams that are working across different time zones, they actually take that into account. So before you are speaking to a customer, either it's before sales or even within customer, you actually try to understand more about the customer and which bucket essentially that they fall under.
Right.
So I think just sort of having playbooks by your key customer segments, that has been sort of super helpful in us to make a pitch which is very catered. So for instance, if I'm talking to a bank, I would talk about fintech. If I'm talking to a healthcare large corporate, then I need to talk about the key things that are happening in that space.
Right.
So but the essential ingredients, so yeah, we have probably we have like uh, sort of different approaches to these customer segments.
Got it. Got it. So just having that clarity in terms of, you know, how do you want to go about servicing which client, and having a set playbook for them might be the way forward. Great.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. Great to hear that, Neha. So, you know, stemming from that itself, you mentioned a couple of times as to, you know, the time zone factor. And I'm sure that, you know, given that you started with the US, now you had great footprint in India as well. And there's so many things happening in different spaces. And given that, you know, the dynamic nature of private markets is such, and, you know, how the startups are evolving is very different in, let's say, US versus a China versus an India versus a Southeast Asia. How do you cope up with this internally, and what's the kind of scale of operations that Traction is dealing with when it comes to international boundary expansion?
Right. So I would say that the way we have solved for uh, the differences across all these is one, using technology, and two, using people who are focusing on different sectors. So I'll go into what this means. So technology, obviously it sounds very cliched, but essentially the approach that we have taken is that we want to become one of the largest platform in the private market data space. And we actually did not on day one go about saying that let's just start with this geography and then do that. Our tech backend actually essentially tracks companies which are coming globally. So be it Africa, be it US, be it Asia. So like this a lot of information about companies are basically captured across geography. So one is that platform. The second thing is that we also use technology for language translation.
Yeah.
So we actually have, for instance, a very good coverage on companies in China, or a very good companies. We have a lot of customers in Germany who are looking at German companies through our platform. So the second thing that we also had to do is language translation, which is to understand which what does this mean, and so that our team can understand it. We had actually debated between the fact that should we hire teams who's sitting locally versus having a central team. And the decision that we ended up doing is that having central team is more efficient if you can do the language translation easier. So that's on the tech part. The second part is the other approach that we have taken is that we don't have a team who's just covering a particular geography. So for instance, we don't have a team who's covering just India. What we have done is that the analyst which covers fintech actually looks at fintech companies globally. So they are also looking at fintech companies in US, in India, in China, in Brazil. So their understanding of that sector is much more detailed about, that this is the business model that the company falls into. So I would say, I think these are the two approaches that we have taken, which has sort of worked for us, which also it made it very scalable. So like today we have customers in 40 different countries, and it was possible because of I think both of these factors.
Got it, got it. But it's wonderful to hear that the scale of operations is such, and the fragmentation and clarity in direction is really great, because to be able to handle clients in, as you mentioned, 40 countries must be spectacular, and it's great that an Indian company is solving in such a great manner. Moving further from that, and revisiting the product thing that we were talking about. So when we look at, all of these, the Unicorn Club, the performance tracker, the competition tracker, and multiple of these offerings that keep evolving year after year, I'm supposing. How is it that, you come up with such, the evolution of products? Because again, I'm sure that the analyst heavy work is already there, and the operations to cope up with already existing clients and serve them with analysis was already there. So what is the the product rollout features like, and how do you practically go about it internally, if you could reflect upon?
Yeah, sure. So giving in context about the the segment that we fall into is more of like a vertical SaaS. So what ends up happening is that if you're working with this customer, you end up having to you start with one particular problem. For instance, you start with sourcing as a problem, but essentially you have to solve more of their problems over time. The second thing is that, okay, can I help you do research on the companies or diligence support on the companies that you're looking at, look at comps or look at more information about the market. The third thing is that if you are having a portfolio, can I help you track the updates that is happening on your portfolio? So essentially, because of the fact that we are in a vertical SaaS space, you essentially have to build more modules to cater to the requirements of your customer segment. So having known that, when we were when we are building the team, the approach that we have taken is making sure that the tech and the product team runs at a very high efficiency. And we are fortunate to have like a very good team, which wherein we have launches every month of new modules, right? And the way they do it is, everyone has their own stream of things, and it's like a, we call it like a Kanban style, wherein it goes from one so it's not so there are two ways in which you can actually do product launch. One is you can decide that, okay, within the this quarter, two things or three things are going to be launched.
Mhm.
The other is that different teams are working at optimal capacity and optimal throughput, and then you essentially try to prioritize the movement of the modules across the across the different queues. So
Right.
we have taken the second approach, which is, there are different queues across the product and the tech, and then all the modules get prioritized amongst those, right? So that's the approach that has worked for us to sort of launch modules in a fairly fast manner. And Yeah, I think probably so for us it has been a combination of data as well as products. So for instance, we have we capture private company financials in about 20 plus countries. So every country has its own filings, has its own sort of models that needs to be built out. So the third thing that has probably worked very well for us is all our BUs actually are have their own automation teams or have their own implementation teams, so they can actually do the build out the whole tech which is required for each of the modules as well.
Got it. Got it. But that sounds very fascinating again, because as somebody who's just, enthusiastic about private markets, I've seen like a couple of offerings which can be within my reach, and it all sounds so fascinating. So I can only imagine the depth in which, it's very helpful to the funds out there, to the Fortune 500s that you're serving. So glad to hear that. And, moving from there itself to something more centric to, let's say traction and not the B2B side of things. So one thing that I really like understanding about startups and about founders is, how they're going about building culture and how they're going about hiring. So when we look at hiring, let's say for instance, right, a good combination of, as you mentioned, tech, product, and analysis must be required at Traction. So it'd be very interesting to hear how you went about hiring initially, as well as now having scaled up the organization to over 600 odd employees working across, like working centrally, but tracking global markets must be immense. So if you could probably take a look at both of these factors and tell us how you go about it, it'll be very helpful for the audience, I suppose.
Yeah. So in terms of hiring, I would say that, as people are thinking about starting up, there is a different way in which you would hire your initial team. There's a different way that you would hire once you've reached a particular scale. I'll probably cover both. The way that we used to hire the initial ones was different. So this was actually told to be by one of our friends, wherein we had asked them, okay, how do you do the hiring initially?
Yeah.
And the thing that actually worked very well is uh, so what we did is, for any particular position, you would actually go about your set of friends whom you respect, and you would ask them that simple question, that in your whatever few years of professional career, who are the top 3 people that you respect the most? And you would ask the same question to about 15 to 20 people, and by the time you've reached the 15th person, you would have made a list of people who have been strongly recommended by more than one person, so have been strongly recommended by 3 to 4 people. So in that case, it's actually very easy for you to uh, make a call that this person is great, and all you have to check is whether they have the interest, or for the particular sector, or it's a good fit or not. So you don't have to do any so I think that worked very brilliantly, that you because it's very difficult for you to gauge how a core member is going to be in the in like 1 hour of interview. So the best way is obviously through references, but how do you basically scale that, right? So the way that that worked really well is that once you have people who have been recommended by 2 to 3 people, that they are one of the best people that they have worked, and then you have a 1 hour meeting when you're mainly just gauging what is the interest level, and what whether it aligns with what they want to do on the longer run. So that really helped us in hiring the initial team. Now the second is, once you scale, and how do you so hiring is essentially for uh, I think if you ask any sort of startup founder, one of their key things would be hiring is the pain point, and they would wish that they can do like a better job in that. So that I think hiring continues to be a key thing about building an organization from the first day to even as the company scales. The coming to the latter part, which is how when you're looking at people when the operations are more scaled, then I think you're more looking at people, at times people who have relevant experience, right, or who have exposure to that particular field. So as we grew, then most of our hiring was inbound based, which is person has already shown an interest in sort of working in a particular space, and then you basically do the interview. So as you sort of scale, I think in a smaller scale, I think references works better, and reflexes are probably essential. There's probably no other way to do that. And on the latter hand, if you as you scale the company, I guess you have to move to more inbound based hiring.
Got it, got it. So, referencing out of, the inner circle and then, going beyond and checking for, relevant experiences and, the startup culture, I'm guessing. So, really glad to hear that. Neha, if you could probably also, a bit touch upon, how the culture at Traction is, because again, startup culture is something that, something that all fascinates all aspiring founders, and especially because, you've seen the let's say the Silicon Valley culture, the Stanford culture, there must be cues that you've taken back from there and tried incorporating here as well. If not, like, how has there been like a contrast if you've observed any? And what is the culture at Traction like, if you can probably reflect a bit?
Yeah. Sure. So obviously, this is one thing that you spend a lot of time in, and it's not about. I think building a culture is not just about the superficial things, but it is it. It's also about the things which matter to people more, and understanding that, and then seeing if those can be addressed. In your working, the way you have structured the organization. So, so I think obviously this is something that is that you end up spending a decent amount of mind share on, which is are you addressing all the key things that matters to most of the people in the team. So for us also it has been good evolution. A couple of the things that have worked very well is how is your day structured, right? So if you look at it, for most people, so I think a couple of the things that people like is that people want to may have their days productive. So when you're spending a day in office, you come back and think that you've done enough. That is really interesting for people. And the second thing what matter to people also is that if it is a little predictable, right? So if the firefighting is lesser versus you are doing more things proactively, right? So how do you basically merge both of these? So a simple example what works for us is that what we call it as time boxing for all the key people that are working. So most of the people that come in, they have their day defined, which is in the about 8.5 9 hours of time that they're going to spend. How are they going to spend each hour typically of the day? Obviously there is some time which is yourself, if you want to spend on few projects, but a lot of your meetings are with your team members, for instance, are there in your calendar. So I think this is one thing which has worked very well, which is making your day predictable, making sure that the spillover is lesser. And at the end of the day, I think a lot gets done. And there are a lot of other subtle things which happen, which is what is the meeting structure, simple things like that. So for instance, we try to have people bring in more decisions than just like you have brainstorming, but I guess we encourage people to get in more decisions. So I think this is a very small thing, which is how do you have your meeting structure, right? And second, obviously, third, obviously, that like what are you doing to interact? I think the other thing which people really valued is how am I being able to interact with my coworkers? Because I think that is one thing that you also take away, that you worked in a particular company, but you also really enjoy your interactions with that. So how do you basically facilitate that? So I think these are probably small bits and that you incorporate in your organizational design to address some of the things that matters a lot to people. And obviously this is like a yeah, it's still working, so you keep taking feedback from people, you keep doing that, and then you keep seeing if there are ways to sort of address the top priorities of people. Simple another thing is that for instance, people used to have a lot of these common things. So we started a session of life hacks internally, wherein anyone would anything that worked very well for someone, they would actually send it to a particular group, and then they would circulate it to everyone. It can be as small as this book really worked very well, and this is what I took away from this. Or it can be much more actionable, that uh, when I started having this in my daily schedule, that really made a difference. So I think it's a lot of those small things that probably goes into having building that in the organization.
Right, right. That sounds very, again, very, very wonderful and fascinating to hear. You mentioned on the smaller aspects of things which are very important. And I guess these are the smaller aspects that might go unnoticed sometimes, but love the concept of, the time boxing concept, the sharing, knowledge sharing, or, life sharing concept, and all the others that you mentioned. So glad to hear that, Neha. Moving ahead from that, and this is also one thing which is almost like a favorite for me. But we've had guests on the show talk about, the importance of fundraising, the importance of having strategic partners along the way. And some have been of the opinion that, you shouldn't network your way around it, and there's no playbook, so to say. Like if your product is self-sufficient, if your metrics speak for itself, the strategic investors follow. And from what I've been able to gather, Traction has been really glad to have some really great names on board. From what I could gather, there's been Ratan Tata, the Bansal brothers, some marquee, institutional investors that have joined your way through the journey. So if you can probably, tell the audience as to how should one approach this, and what are the benefits of having such strategic partners through your journey, because I'm sure like it's already been 6 years, and I'm sure like it's only been 40 countries now. To cover all countries and to make sure that the scale of operations keeps rising, it's a longer journey. So would love to understand from you what your take on this aspect of things is.
Yeah. So we have, been very fortunate to have some really nice and respected angels as well as investors along the way. And I think what we have, we have sort of consciously done when we were doing our fundraisers. Also because of the fact that probably, we were both, me and my co-founder were earlier investors, so we had seen that side of the world as well, and we had seen that it matters a lot to have sort of the right people on your board, or as your investors, or as your angel investors. How important role that it plays along in just your strategic thinking, in just the times that the company is taking key decisions, right? So to basically address that, I think one of the things that we had done is along each of our institutional round, we had also gotten a few angel investors who could help us as we are scaling. So that has been a little bit different concept than probably most other companies. But if you see, the way we have done it is, a lot of interesting and respected angels have had come to on our cap table after our institutional Series A, or along with our Series B. So this is one thing that we have consciously done to get interesting people, and it's awesome that you otherwise uh, the other thing that happens is that it's very difficult to get time with these investors otherwise,
Right.
right? But if they ended up investing in you, if they are on your cap table, then getting like 2 meetings a year is otherwise, which have been difficult, that's easy. And essentially you basically the inputs, a lot of them inputs is more on the strategy, right? Like they have seen businesses panning out for a few years, and this is the aspect that they are able to add a lot of value, which is more on the key one or two decisions on directional level that we end up doing. So we do actually end up speaking to these angels even like 1 to 2 year times a year, which is super helpful, which is otherwise very difficult to get time. So I think the best way that you can get time of people is if you can have them invest even a small amount on in the company.
Right, right. Really. So it goes to show that like these people do matter, and it's very important to have them. But Neha, like any suggestions or any feedback as to how do you get such great people on board? Because I'm sure like it's not the easiest. I get that you both the co-founders come from a background of respectable companies, respectable funds, but beyond that as well, there've been some great names. So just curious to
Right.
understand, how did you go about getting such great people on board?
Right. So it has been two ways. One is in case there is anyone who is very relevant to you, who has interest in the space. Whenever they say you are very open to it, you are very open to making it work based on the round construct that works for them. So that's one. And the second one is actually just probably thinking that anything is possible. So interesting example is that it was we didn't think, for instance, like Mr. Ratan Tata or Mr. Nandan Nilekani would personally come in until we actually met them. And so I think so it was very difficult for us to believe earlier that we can actually get them as investors. But I think if you feel that someone can add real value to that, and then I think you should just try to figure your way. And uh, I think just don't be constrained that if someone is not in your first degree network, then it's very difficult to get them. But you can always find a sort of good connection to the people that you respect or you want to get on your cap table.
Got it, got it. You have to be like ambitious enough and find ways, I guess. Like goes on to define entrepreneurship as well. And glad to hear that, and understand that it's not just the first degree connections that matter. If you can eventually, figure it out. Great to hear that. And, this entire segment has been wonderful. And as we enter the concludatory phases, Neha, before we go on to a couple of questions that I might want to ask about you as a founder, I'd like to understand, that like let's talk a bit about, the challenges. So because you've seen like a 6+ year journey, 600 employees, it's been a great ride, and I'm hoping it's going to be onwards from here as it has been yet. But there must have been multiple challenges. If not challenges, the scope of the problems that you're solving keep expanding further, right? So if you can talk a bit about, how do you go about, if not solving, what is the strategy like to, manage scale? How do you go about ensuring that everything's stable while you're exponentially growing, and what is that strategy like for the company internally?
So as a company, problem solving has to be, you have to be good at that, because at every stage of the company you will be having different set of problems. So for instance, the way you're doing initially when you're finding a product market fit is different versus on the second aspect wherein you are scaling your sales team, right? Simple things like your go to market strategy, the way you would do it for your first 1,000 customers is different from the way you would do it for subsequent 1,000 customers. So I think the as an organization you have to be good at problem solving at each different stage, and the set of key focus areas for each stage is sort of different. So I think this has to be ingrained in all the business units, all the departments that you're working in. And for each I think the way you would end up doing it is obviously having like a good core team who is then focusing on the different issues at their functions, which then keeps changing over time. So I think as an org you have to be able to do that, because that is essential. What has worked for you in your 0 to 100 customer is different from what worked for you for the next set of 1,000 customers,
Yeah.
and for subsequent scaling. So your each department also has to keep sort of scaling as the organization scales.
Right, right. So the dynamic nature of being able to, cope up with the speed of things is very important, as you mentioned. Great to hear that.
Right.
And with that, let's take a step forward and go on to the concluding segments. I want to understand better as to, how you are as a founder. So I have a couple of questions around it. So like the first question is very direct. And if you can answer probably, what kind of a founder are you? What keeps you motivated, and what keeps the hustle going for you personally? And how are you with like employees? What's a typical day for you? Like if any of the things that can help us understand better as to Neha Singh, the co-founder of Traction, as a person as well as the founder.
Sure. So as a founder, I was attracted more towards this as solving a problem versus just starting a company. So
Right.
I think that is one thing that keeps you motivated. So I think essentially to probably be a good senior manager, you would need two things. One is which keeps you motivated at different levels. So one is your vision, which it sounds very cliched, but essentially you have to be able to see the market pan out in a way which currently it is not, because as you're scaling obviously you'll have a lot of you will face issues across various things, but essentially if you have a very clear vision as to how big do you see this opportunity, how do you see the market evolve, then that is something that obviously keeps you really motivated, really hungry to take up more of the pie of this evolving market. And I think the second thing is just the attention to detail, or being good at ops. I think that's also essential part. Just having a vision and not breaking it down into actionable items can then leave it as just the idea that you want it to be. So to actually see it in action, I think the other part is probably also important, which is just breaking it down into smaller pieces, and have your giving clear uh, sort of helping give clarity around what are the priorities around it.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
so I think probably the combination of these two things keeps you motivated, and keeps you on the bigger mission that you are on.
Absolutely. True, true, true. So you spoke about mission, but I'm sure, like, so the motivation lasts only so much, and I'm like sure it lasts for a longer time. But what I'm trying to add is when you're not working and when it's not
Yeah.
all hands down
Right.
in terms of traction, what is your like
Right.
get away kind of a mode? What do you do beyond the scope of work? Very enthusiastic to
Yeah.
understand for aspiring founders as to how not I wouldn't go to the extent of calling it work life balance because again those are idealistic terms, but what is beyond
Right.
work life for you, if you may refer?
Yeah. I think it's it may sound very boring, but I also have a calendar for my personal life. So all the tasks, so all the office tasks are, are there in the calendar, and that's where you do most of your task management or your day planning. I have a similar thing also for all the other tasks. So, be it Saturday or be it Sunday, when it's weekend and anything kind of spills over, you have a, set of things that you want to get done. So I think it may sound very boring, but that has probably worked well for me to not have any threats lying around. So that's one thing that I do on a personal front as well. And I think just something that probably I enjoy is just like meeting more people in the ecosystem. I as such, I've been part of the startup ecosystem as an investor earlier and as a founder for quite a few years, and love the increased sort of buzz which is happening, love the new set of founders, new set of companies which come up into this. So I think the second thing which I really like is finding some way in keeping up to date or keeping in touch with a lot of people in this ecosystem.
Got it, got it. That sounds very interesting again. I love the fact that, just your detail, it's not boring at all, but goes to show that, this is the focus perspective, even when it comes to personal life. And glad to hear, yeah, like, your career's been like almost 11 years, if I may call it that, since 2010. And you still have that motivation to meet a lot of people, which testifies with our interaction as well. And again, thanks for the opportunity. Before we close this episode down, Neha, like again, without getting too philosophical in nature, I am a strong believer of the fact that these set of episodes are helping us learn from each other. So if you may, like, I like to end the episodes with this line of questioning where I ask, so if you could probably reflect a bit upon your career as of now, which has been like a great one, and you're still very young, and I'm hoping it's going to be even better as we progress ahead. But from your past experiences, if there are any major learnings that you would like to pass on to
Right.
the young set of entrepreneurs that are listening, that'd be very wonderful to hear.
Right. No, absolutely. I think I have also benefited a lot from hearing from people. So I would love to sort of pass on things which has worked. So I'd probably say two key things which I have seen. One is it's not the talent alone that takes you where you want to be, but it is the drive that takes you. A lot of people who I've seen perform very well professionally are more people that are driven than just raw talent. In fact, at times I've seen people become a little bit more complacent, who are like very talented, but because in this, I think in any organization, if you're part of a company or if you're doing something, there's a lot of figuring out that you need to do. And so that is one thing that I've seen very inherently, that whatever talent that you have, it's the drive that will probably define where you end up reaching. So that's one thing. And the second thing, what I would that I have seen a lot in people, and I would recommend people to not do that, is a lot of people are actually wondering what they want to do with their life, and what is the best career that I want to be. And because of it, so you can do this two ways. You can do this either by being confused in what you are currently doing, or the second way is that you know you say that whatever I decide, that's fine. I can keep thinking about what I want to do after, say, 5 years, 10 years, but let me also focus on doing the current job very well.
Yeah.
Right. So I would actually urge people to do the latter, which is, you know a lot of us are confused about, okay, what I want to do after 5 years, 10 years. Do I want to be in the marketing stack? Do I want to be the business strategy? Do I want to be in consulting? Do I want to be in tech? Do I want to be in product? So you are having a lot of questions about your career and where you want to be, but let that not drive sort of confusion and suboptimal performance in what you're currently doing. So you should continue to do what you're doing at the job at hand. And what I have realized is that that really works very well. So whatever things that you've learned unknowingly in what you're doing currently, eventually it ends up adding in what you end up deciding even later. So I think these would be the probably top two tips that I would give people who are starting their careers or in the earlier years of their careers.
Got it, got it. So basically, being able to like manage talent and be able to work hard along with it and have that drive to, give it your all. And along with that, not being too focused about things that may or may not happen in the first place, and concentrating yourself into things that are on your plate at the current instant. I think those two are beautiful portions and a great way to end the episode. With that, Neha, I would like to thank you again for, appearing on the Indian Silicon Valley podcast. This has been such an honor for me to be able to host you. Thank you so, so much for taking our time for this. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks a lot. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much.